Last week, I was in Las Vegas, and I was in a position of negative leverage. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. I don't gamble. It was another more subtle kind of leverage that the hotel I was staying in had over me. And before I explain to you what that leverage was, let's define what we mean by leverage. When you have leverage, you possess an advantage of power to influence a person or situation to achieve a particular outcome. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. So I got to Vegas and I checked into my hotel early in the morning. Went up to the room and I was going to work for a little bit in the room. I looked around and they had this great view out of the window. I was staying at the Bellagio, you know, the one with the fountains in the front, and you could see the strip down there. And so from a distance, Las Vegas is kind of impressive. I find when you get up close, it gets a little more grimy. So I'm looking around my room, getting ready to do a bit of work, and I want a cup of coffee. But guess what? There is no coffee maker in the hotel rooms of the Bellagio. And why is that? Well, you see, the hotel, where do they make their money from? It's not from the rooms. It's from people spending money in the casino. And the hotel is designed to influence someone to spend as much money as possible and time as possible in the casino. And so one of the reasons why they don't put coffee in the rooms is because in order to get a cup of coffee at the Bellagio, you have to go down the elevator, walk all the way through the casino to get to the Starbucks at the north entrance, where you have the privilege of paying $5 for a cup of coffee. And because I'm a dedicated coffee drinker, like I'm sure many of you are, the Bellagio had the advantage of possessing power over me to influence me to achieve a particular outcome, which is walking through the casino and perhaps being tempted by the slot machines, the craps table, the roulette, the blackjack, or the poker. Now, how do you think that made me feel? I've got to admit, as I looked around my room and didn't find a coffee pot, I was a little pissed off. Just like the Bellagio had leverage over me, and it made me feel angry. Many business owners are in a position where their employees have leverage over them. In other words, their employees possess the power to influence business owners to achieve a particular outcome. And for most employees, what is that particular outcome? That particular outcome usually is keeping their jobs. Now, you may think that I'm taking kind of a negative view of employees, but I like to think of it as a realistic view. And particularly in construction at the present time, where for most construction companies, there's a shortage of skill both in the field and in the office. It's very important that you don't allow your employees to have a negative impact on your business by possessing leverage over you. So in this episode, we're going to explore 5 examples of negative leverage, the detrimental or negative impact of this type of leverage, and then practical ways that you can avoid these leverage situations. So the first thing we want to talk about here is the 5 examples of negative leverage. And when it comes to them, I'd like you to think about how an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And the reason is because there isn't easy remedies or painless remedies to most of these situations of negative leverage. So I'm going to give you the 5 examples of leverage up front, and then I'll explain each one. And as I do, I'd like you to think about, is there anyone in my company at the moment who has this type of leverage over me? And if so, what do I plan to do about it? So let me just name them off here, and then we'll go through explaining each one. First one is technical Tina. Number 2, relationship Rick. Number 3, location Larry. Number 4, legacy Linda. And number 5, Freddie family member. Now, I understand this is a little bit cheesy, but I give you the cheesy names just to kind of give you something to hook into there, right? Okay, so technical Tina, relationship Rick, location Larry, legacy Linda, and Freddie the family member. Let's go through each one and discuss how they may have a negative impact on your business. Let's talk about technical Tina. Technical Tina is the person in your organization with specialized knowledge, particularly knowledge that you don't possess, or knowledge that you perhaps possess but don't want to exercise because it's not the highest and best use of your time. Let me give you an example. Perhaps there's someone in your construction company who's in charge of finances or accounting. They've been doing it for years. They're comfortable with all of the programs, and they've got themselves in a position of power in your organization because perhaps they have control over the purse strings, of course, with your final approval, and they have control over the processes that are related to the distribution of money throughout your organization. And because they're in that place of power and that place of technical knowledge, that place of leverage, they can often be in a situation where they're performing in a manner that's perhaps not up to standard, but you don't want to do anything about it because it would cost you in your mind too much in terms of time and effort and the difficulty of finding someone else to replace them. Perhaps you have someone else in your organization with specialized knowledge in a piece of software, or perhaps it's project-based technical specialized knowledge where they know how to do a particular type of work that you do. And perhaps you've brought them on specifically for a particular type of project that maybe you're not as experienced in. Or perhaps it could be an operator in the field who has a particular skill set running some machinery or a piece of equipment. And as a result of that, they understand the leverage or the power that they have over you, and they can adopt a sort of a prima donna attitude. So think about in your organization, are there any technical Tinas? People who have specialized knowledge and are yet not performing to the highest level possible, but because they have that specialized knowledge, they have power over you. What can you do in this situation? Well, make sure that you train their replacement. Make sure they understand that they are not indispensable. Nobody in your organization should be indispensable. And I don't mean that in a mean way or anything like that, or that you should try and take advantage of your employees. But in every company, there should be a reciprocal relationship between employees and employers. In other words, the employers should pay well and provide benefits according to what the market demands, and the employees should live up to the expectations of the employers and bring to the table their energy and their effort. No one should be slacking off. No one should be taking advantage. No one should be playing the sort of government employee role in your organization. So make sure you don't allow any technical Tinas. The next type of person in your organization that could have leverage over you is relationship Rick. And many companies have relationship Rick in their organization. So let's say you're the type of person who maybe you love to build and you're really focused on continuing to grow your organization, and you depend upon one or two people in your company to develop customer relationships and maintain client relationships. Perhaps you have one of those relationship Ricks that is particularly skilled at business development, and you count on them to bring in new work and new projects into your company. Beware of relationship Rick. Because if you only have one person who has specific relationships with specific clients or is particularly skilled at bringing in business, they can have that position of leverage or power over you. And because they have that position of leverage and power, they can at times abuse that position of leverage and power. Now, I'm not saying it happens in every situation, but human beings at times can behave in ways that are not fully beneficial for your company. So what do you need to do? Make sure you don't have your eggs all in one person's basket. Make sure you, as the leader of your organization, is establishing relationships with all of your clients to one degree or another. You never want to be beholden to one person in your organization, so that if they left your company, let's say, and went to work for the competition, they would take that relationship with them, and you would not have any kind of bridge to that client so that you could develop a relationship if someone else left, or so that you don't already have a relationship in place. You, as the leader of your organization, are very much responsible ultimately for business development. So make sure you're establishing relationships with your key clients, with your key project partners, so that if relationship Rick leaves, it doesn't put you in a position that you would regret. The third type of person who can have leverage over you is Location Larry. Now, Location Larry is a real interesting person, because let's say you've decided to expand geographically. You're working in a particular geography, and maybe a client has taken you into another geography. And as you've gone into that geography, perhaps you've had to hire someone outside of the geography that you're in order to run that project. Or perhaps you've brought in a team of labor that's locally based, where you've expanded to run that job. And they have leverage over you because you don't have anyone else besides them to run that project. And so Location Larry is a person or a whole team of people that are running projects in that area, and if they're not there, it's going to have a massive negative impact upon your organization, and they know it. They know that you don't have an established presence in that location, and they perhaps take advantage and abuse that position of power. So what can you do about that? It's a really tough one. You have to make sure when you're expanding geographically that you have someone in that location that you trust, someone to run work for you that is either an employee of the organization or someone that you know who you can hire and bring on, that you trust to run the work in such a way so that it will represent your company in a manner that will enable you to establish yourself in that new geography and do a great job running the work for your clients. Don't let Location Larry have leverage over you. The fourth person or type of person who could have leverage over you is Legacy Linda. And this happens a lot of times in companies who are going through transitions. Perhaps you have someone who's been in the business for a long time, who's highly compensated, and they are beginning to get to that point in their career where their compensation level is not commensurate with the contribution that they're making. I was chatting with one of my clients many years ago, and they were extremely frustrated with a particular individual who was being paid about double what they were actually worth. And he was telling me, I could hire 2 guys to come in and do the work that this person is doing for the amount of money that we are paying just this one individual. So you have to look at your organization and ask, are there any legacy Lindas? Are there any folks who've been here for a while, they've made a contribution, but they are no longer making the kind of contribution they need to with regards to how much money they're being paid? Make sure that this person is not a roadblock to the long-term success of your organization. Another way these legacy Lindas can impact your company is they can be a hindrance to change. They can be unwilling to have fresh accountability in their life. And so what you have to do with these legacy type individuals is make sure that they understand that they're valued and honored, but you have to hold them accountable and always be looking for their replacement. And this is very hard to do with all of these examples that I'm giving you. You should never be in a situation where one person has power to influence your company in a negative way. The only person who should have ultimate power over your organization is you as the senior executive or owner in your business. The fifth and final person is, or type of person, is perhaps for many construction company owners the most challenging, and that is Freddie, the family member. It's the son or daughter who you've been thinking about bringing into the business or you have already brought into the business, and they are not necessarily as talented, as skilled, or as driven as you are. And yet you as a parent feel that obligation to give them an opportunity, and you bring them in, and it really hinders the overall growth and dynamic of your company. And this is a real tough one because all of us know as parents, it can be extremely hard to be objective about how talented our children are. And so if you're going to be bringing in family members into your organization, and if you're hoping to be able to pass off your company to the next generation, you need a particular perspective. And in my work with construction companies, I've observed the family businesses that have done well. And what they do is they always start their kids off early in the business, and they always start them in the trenches. And they make the emphasis that their last name has no impact. It is the quality of the work that they produce and the contribution that they make to the organization that is important. So if you're going to have family members, you have to work hard not to allow them to have a sense of entitlement, but clearly define their role and responsibility. And if possible, have them report to someone else in your organization so that they can be held accountable for their performance. And make sure that you're giving that person in your organization who they are reporting to complete control over their work performance. Empower them to hold your son or your daughter accountable so that they can grow and learn in the business and not become one of those family members that weighs down the organization. So we've talked about the 5 examples of leverage. And now what I'd like to cover is the negative impact of this type of leverage in your organization. So when one of these people have power over you in some way or another, it really does have a negative impact on your company. And the first thing it does is it impacts morale, because your people in your organization are extremely smart. In other words, they know when someone has leverage over you. And that can impact morale in a bad way. Because if you're holding one person accountable, but you're refusing to hold another person accountable for whatever reason, it's something that sets you up for people really perceiving you in a negative way. And not only can the morale be bad, but the growth can be stagnant as a result of people having leverage over you. Poor performers result in profit fade. If you're looking at profit fade in your organization, it can be because you're allowing poor performers and you're not dealing with the issues that they're presenting to you, and you're not holding people accountable for their lack of performance. And the reason why that profit fade happens is because when somebody sees one person not being held accountable, the typical reaction can be this: if they aren't held accountable, then why do I have to step up and do my work? It's kind of like in a family, right? Where one kid looks at another kid not being held accountable. And as a result of that, they figure they can behave in an unacceptable way as well. So morale is bad, growth is stagnant, and then it also creates, in some companies, what I call behavior silos. So some areas of the company are doing very well, and other areas of the company are not. Perhaps you have one project team that kicks butt every single time they're given a project, but because you have some of those leverage issues on another project team, perhaps there's a project executive that you don't hold accountable for whatever reason, what happens then is you have these behavior silos. And some projects consistently come in profitably, other projects consistently struggle. And the only way to deal with this negative impact of leverage is to deal with it, is to address it, is to admit that it's happening, and to take steps to remedy the situation. And the good news is, if you're willing to do that, it immediately enhances your leadership credibility. So we've talked about 5 examples of leverage and the negative impact of leverage. Now let's cover practical ways to avoid leverage situations. The first way you can do this is to define the values that drive your business. What are the ways of behaving that define you as a company? And when you do that, the wonderful thing that it creates is a sense of clarity. Because if you say, these are our values by which we run our organization, it will immediately begin to spotlight people who are behaving according to those values within your company and people who are not. And many of those situations of leverage that we discussed earlier, the reason why they have power over you is because of their particular technical skill, or the fact they're in a particular location, or they have specific relationships, but they don't live out the values that drive your company. And once you've defined those values, you can begin to see the people who are perhaps in those places of power, but are not necessarily a good fit for your organization. Because companies that define their values well, what the effect of that is it attracts the right types of people to their organization, but then it repels the wrong types of people away from their organization. Once you defined your values, or the way that people in your company should be showing up and behaving every day, then what you need to do is define roles and responsibilities very clearly. Every single person in your company should have a clearly defined set of roles and responsibilities that they understand and they agree to. Now, I understand that this sounds obvious, but number one, many companies I know don't have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Or number two, they have dusty roles and responsibilities that somebody gave them years ago and are stuck up on a shelf somewhere, and they never pull them out and communicate them to people when they join the company or when they get promoted into a new position. So make sure that everyone understands clearly their role and responsibility, and that people are able to fulfill their role and responsibility and at the same time live out the values that define your organization. Those two things have to go hand in hand. In other words, it's not enough to have technical skill. You must have technical skill, and you must be behaviorally aligned with the way your company shows up. And then you, as a leader, you have to hold people accountable for the values that drive your company and for fulfilling the role and responsibility in your organization. And to do that, you have to evaluate them on a consistent basis. You have to give them at least, at a minimum, an annual review based on their role and responsibility and based on the values that drive your organization. So those are the 3 things that we covered here today. We talked about the 5 examples of leverage, the negative impact of leverage, and practical ways to avoid leverage situations. Now, I understand that it's very easy for me to sit here and give you all of this advice. And you might be listening to the podcast today and say, Eric, I'm extremely busy, and I may have those technical Tinas and the location Larrys and the relationship Ricks in my organization, but right now I can't move them on from my company because I need them. And what you're describing right there is someone who has leverage over you. Now, how long are you going to allow them to have that leverage position? You may not be able to do something about it today, but you can begin to make progress to doing something about it. You can begin by sitting down with them and explaining to them their role and responsibility. Okay? You can begin by clearly communicating to them the way that you want them to behave on a day in and day out basis. Because if you don't sit down and do that, they're going to continue to have that power over you, and you're going to continue to suffer the negative impact of leverage. Now, going back to my example of Vegas, right? They had leverage over me at the Bellagio because every day I went downstairs, walked through the casino, and went to the Starbucks and got myself a cup of coffee. Now, that's my bad, perhaps, for wanting that cup of coffee every day. But guess what? I didn't gamble. So they didn't achieve what they were looking to get from me. And it was a temporary situation. In other words, I only stayed at the Bellagio for a couple of days, and then I came back home. And back home, I got my French press and my coffee, and I can make coffee in the morning, and it's no big deal. The problem is for many business owners is they allow these positions of leverage that people have over them to continue year after year after year. And so in order to overcome that, you have to do some hard work. Like I said earlier, define your values and commit to hiring and promoting people that are aligned with those values. Define roles and responsibilities, communicate those clearly, and don't allow people to perform below those roles and responsibilities without holding them accountable. Be willing as an owner or as a senior executive to have difficult conversations with the people who are perhaps in those leverage positions. And make sure that everyone in your company understands that there's no one who's irreplaceable or indispensable. And that means that you have to consistently be doing your best to develop your bench, to be reaching out to talent, if necessary, to bring them into your organization, but also developing talent internally. So everyone feels some positive pressure to step up and live out the values of the organization and fully execute their role and responsibility. And if that's not happening, then you have to make change. And this is the way that I look at it. When one of my clients is talking to me about someone that they're concerned with, I give them a 6-month window in terms of the way I think about it. And I ask them this question. If we're having this same conversation about this individual who you're allowing to have leverage over you in a particular situation, if we're having the same conversation 6 months from now, do I have your permission to yell at you? And what I mean by that is this. You can't allow these things just to go on and on and on. You have to deal with them. You have to identify them. You have to be willing to have those difficult conversations. So I hope you found this podcast helpful. Again, don't allow people to have you in that place of leverage. Be willing to do what you need to do in order to be free as a business owner, to work with the types of people who are making the types of contribution to your organization that you desire. So make sure that you've clearly defined those roles and responsibilities, you're living out your values on a regular basis, and you're attracting the right people into your organization who are expressing those values and executing their tasks at the highest possible level on a consistent basis. My name is Eric Anderton. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Construction Genius. I would be deeply grateful if you would share it with other people. And if you do like it, give us a rating and a review, a 5-star rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us to get up the search engines and get the word out to other people in the construction industry. Appreciate you listening here today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit. And always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.